Inzwi's mother, Madame Olamide, called out from the smoky kitchen as the smell of fried plantains filled the air. "Inzwi, you'll miss the school bell again. Hurry!" "I'm coming, Mama," Inzwi mumbled, pulling the old raffia blanket tighter over her head. Her eyes were heavy and her spirit even heavier. She had no desire to go to that noisy school with its endless rules and boring chants. After a long sigh, she peeled herself out of bed like cold yam and dragged her feet to the water drum outside to brush her teeth. She splashed herself clean with cold morning water, her breath fogging in the air. After changing into her khaki uniform, she grabbed her school satchel and trudged to the small clay kitchen. The roasted maize and beans her mother set aside had already cooled. She ate quickly, left the enamel plate behind and slipped out the door. Inzwi was the only child of Madame Olamide and Baba Lado, who both dreamed that one day she'd become a woman of wisdom and pride for the village of Azonti. But something in her had shifted. The once obedient daughter who sat cross-legged to sweep the compound and fetched water without being asked had become distant, wild-eyed and careless with her words. As she stepped outside the mud gate, she met her closest friends, Ayira and Seti, beneath the old baobab tree. The trio laughed as they strolled toward the roadside, their bags bouncing behind them like mischief itself. Ayira, tall like a sugarcane stalk and louder than a talking drum, always had ideas that ended in scoldings. Seti was softer in tone, but her actions spoke louder than her whispers. Together they were like smoke and wind. Trouble always followed. Just the night before, Madame Olamide had looked Inzwi in the eye and warned, "That Ayira girl and her shadow Sedi, they bring nothing but confusion. You think they are your friends, but one day your tears will taste bitter because of them." "Mama, please," Inzwi had snapped. "They've done nothing to me. You just don't understand." Olamide's voice grew firm. "You don't see what mothers see. My eyes are older than yours. You better open your ears before their path becomes your regret." But Inzwi had turned her head, believing the wisdom of youth outweighed the voice of age. As the girls walked further from the school route, Ayira suddenly clapped her hands with excitement. "Let's not go to class today. Kofi is throwing a bash right now. His cousins from the big town are there already." Sedi's eyes danced. "A morning party? Are you serious?" Ayira smirked. "When has Kofi ever followed the village bell? His place is fire. Let's enjoy ourselves." They all turned to Inzwi. For a moment, her mother's words fluttered in her ears like a warning bird, but she shook her head. "School. We'll always be there. Let's go." Their feet changed direction, and they hurried toward the rundown quarter where Kofi lived. He was Ayira's boyfriend, a 22-year-old man known in Azonti for loud music, idle talk, and empty pockets. His compound reeked of stale ogogoro and burnt herbs. Music pounded before they even knocked. Inside, Kofi and his loafing friends were dancing, sweating, and drinking. He welcomed them with open arms, his lips curled in a lazy grin. "Welcome, my queens. Come, make yourselves at home." He tossed his arm around Ayira while one of his tall friends, Kwame, leaned toward Inzwi and began a slow, flirty conversation. Inzwi smiled nervously, her heart fluttering like a moth to fire. The hours melted away like palm oil in the sun. Back home, Madame Olamide paced across the woven mat in the parlor. She stared at the wooden clock every few minutes, her gut twisting. "Lado, something's not right," she muttered. "She's in school," Baba Lado said flatly, but even his voice lacked conviction. "No, the spirits are whispering. Something is wrong." The sun passed its highest point and began its fall, yet Inzwi was nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, at Kofi's house, the music grew louder, and the girls danced like leaves in the Harmattan wind. Inzwi felt free, untethered, like she had swallowed the sky. But inside, a small voice gnawed at her, whispering, "What if Mama knows?" As dusk painted the sky orange, the girls knew it was time. "What do we say?" Sedi asked, her voice shaken. "Simple," Ayira said, brushing off her dress. "We say we had late classes. Easy." Inzwi nodded, though her chest pounded like a djembe drum. On their walk home, Inzwi's steps grew slower, her throat tightened. She knew her parents would not take this lightly. She crept into the compound quietly as night settled. Her slippers barely touched the floor, but her mother sat in the center of the room, arms folded, eyes sharp as thorns. Where have you been? Inzwi froze. We had extra lessons, she said, eyes avoiding the flame in her mother's stare. Extra lessons? Olamide's voice rose like thunderclouds. Do you take me for a blind goat? School ended hours ago. I lost track of time. Just then Babalado emerged, his face stone-like. This foolishness ends now. For 2 weeks you step nowhere except school. And those girls, they will not enter this house again. Inzwi's cheeks burned. That's not fair, I'm not a baby. Don't raise your voice at your father, her mother snapped. Go inside before I say something I regret. Inzwi stormed into her room and slammed the wooden door. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone and typed furiously to Ayira and Sedi, pouring her anger into words that even she didn't believe. Inzwi sat on her raffia mat, her fingers tapping angrily on her small hidden phone, one her parents didn't even know existed. This is why you must stop letting them control you. Ayira's message blinked on the screen. They treat you like a goat dragging you by the rope. I talk to my parents however I want, and you should too. Sedi's message followed. Yes, Inzwi, you're 16, not 6. They have to respect your path now. The next morning, Inzwi wrapped her school scarf around her head, slung her bag over her shoulder, and left the compound as if everything was normal. But instead of heading toward the schoolyard, she joined Ayira and Sedi under the same baobab tree. The three didn't hesitate. They strolled away, laughter echoing behind them. Their feet carried them to Kwame's home, the same Kwame who had whispered smooth words to Inzwi at Kofi's party. Since then, the two had begun meeting in secret, calling themselves lovers. As they arrived, Kwame opened the door with a wide smile and pulled Inzwi close. I missed you, he whispered, his voice warm like mid-morning sun. She blushed, feeling her cheeks bloom with heat. Once inside, Kwame turned the lock with a sharp click. The others stayed in the corner as the lovers disappeared into his back room. It became a pattern. Days melted into weeks. Inzwi stopped showing up to school. Her mornings were now filled with Kwame's voice and lazy days in his cramped room. Ayira and Sedi clapped for her choices, saying she was finally tasting life. But back home, Madame Olamide sensed a change. Inzwi's spark dimmed. Her schoolbooks stayed untouched, and whispers reached Olamide's ears. One afternoon after dinner, Babalado looked at his daughter and said calmly, Your headmistress called again today. She says you're barely attending classes. Where do your feet take you each morning, Inzwi? Inzwi crossed her arms and stared coldly. Why do you always act like I'm a child? I can make my own decisions. Olamide gasped softly, her heart cracking. We're not your enemies. We are the ones who carried you when you were too small to walk. This path you've chosen is filled with thorns. You never understand me, Inzwi shouted, storming off to her room. As she lay on her mat, she texted Kwame, They're yelling again. I'm tired of this. His reply came quickly. Then, come to me. You always have a place here. His words wrapped around her like comfort, though deep inside her chest a tiny flutter of unease stirred. The next morning, Inzwi prepared as usual. But this time Madame Olamide watched closely through the curtain slit as her daughter walked away. The way she carried her bag, the lack of hurry in her step, it didn't feel right. So Olamide tied her wrapper tightly, covered her head, and followed quietly behind. She stayed back just enough to remain unseen. She watched as Inzwi met Ayira and Sedi with familiar smiles. Then her heart grew heavier as the girls took a turn, away from school, away from truth. What road is this? They follow, Olamide muttered. She hurried, her sandals slapping against the red earth as she chased the shadow of her daughter's choices. Eventually, the trail led to a run-down compound at the edge of the village. The door opened, and a young man stepped out. Inzwi embraced him. Laughter spilled from her lips, the kind that used to greet her mother's cooking. Rage surged in Olamide's chest. She didn't wait. She marched to the door and pounded with the fury of a storm. The door creaked open and Kwame stared in confusion. Yes, madam, he asked. Where is my child? Olamide barked, pushing past him like a woman possessed. Inzwi stumbled into view, her face pale as ash. Mama, what am I doing here? Olamide thundered. No, my daughter, what are you doing here? Is this your classroom? Is this your future? Inzwi opened her mouth, but No words came. Olamide didn't wait. She grabbed her daughter by the arm, dragging her toward the door. "You shame your father. You spit on the hopes we planted," she cried, her voice breaking. Kwame tried to step forward, but Olamide's glare struck him still. "Don't even breathe." Inzwi's friends stayed hidden in the corner, unsure whether to flee or help. Down the path they went, Olamide pulling her daughter past gawking neighbors. Once home, she flung the door open and pointed inside. "You are not leaving this house again unless it's for school," she declared, "and I will walk you there myself and bring you back." Inzwi said nothing. Her face darkened like a brewing storm. That evening, when her parents stepped out for prayers, she made up her mind. She stuffed clothes into a wrapper, tied it tight, and whispered to herself, "They will never understand me. Kwame will." Her heart pounded as she stepped over the threshold of her home and ran into the night. When Kwame opened the door, he was surprised, but smiled nonetheless. "I couldn't." "Stay there," she said breathlessly. "I'm staying with you now." Kwame blinked, unsure. "You really want this?" "I'm sure," she whispered. But as the moon rose and shadows fell across the compound, Inzwi lay awake beside him, staring at the cracked ceiling. A chill ran down her spine. She told herself this was freedom, but deep down, a question echoed, that she dared not speak. Had she chosen wrong? Inzwi adapted swiftly to life inside Kwame's cramped room. To her it felt like liberation, the kind she had only dreamed of when staring at the stars above her father's compound. But this so-called freedom was not something her parents would ever accept. Days melted into one another, like melted shea, butter, and not a single word came from home. Inzwi told herself they had given up, tired of chasing her shadow. What she didn't know was that her silence was not peace. It was the quiet before the storm. Baba Lado and Madame Olamide were not sleeping. They were watching, planning, waiting. They believed she would eventually come back, her head bowed and heart heavy with regret. But when no such return came, they acted. One afternoon, while Inzwi lounged on Kwame's worn-out couch, swiping lazily through her phone, a loud pounding echoed from the wooden door. Kwame got up and opened it. Standing outside were two men, in uniform, their faces blank. Behind them were her parents, their eyes hard like carved stone. "Are you Kwame?" one officer asked. "Yes." "I am," Kwame replied, unsure. "You're under arrest for harboring a minor," the officer declared, pulling out handcuffs with a metallic clink. "What?" Kwame stepped back, stunned. Inzwi bolted up. "Mama? Papa? What are you doing?" "This is for your own good," Madame Olamide said, her voice shaking, not just from anger but from grief. Kwame was cuffed and pulled from the house, leaving Inzwi screaming in protest. She tried to chase after them, but Babalado stepped in her path. "You are coming home," he said, low and firm. "No, I'm not leaving," she cried, tears pouring down her cheeks. "You have no choice," her mother said quietly. "We have let this go too far. It ends today." With no mercy for her struggles, her parents guided her into their car. The drive back to Azonti was silent, except for Inzwi's soft sobs. At home, she stormed into the compound, slamming her door shut behind her. But her parents weren't done. They followed her into the room. "You've brought shame on this family," Babalado said, his voice like the slow drum of an oncoming funeral. "Do you even know what you've done?" "I love Kwame," she screamed. "You can't run my life forever, love," Madame Olamide hissed. "You call this love? What about your path, your learning, your future?" "I don't care about school," Inzwi yelled, her voice cracking. Before her parents could speak again, Inzwi's knees buckled. She clutched her belly and gasped. "Inzwi!" her mother cried, catching her before she hit the ground. At the village clinic, the midwife's words stabbed through the silence. "She's carrying a child." Madame Olamide fell into her husband's arms, tears soaking into his tunic. "Our daughter, just 16. Babalado turned away, his face a mask of pain. When Inzwi woke, her parents sat at her side, but their eyes held both fire and heartbreak. "Do you see now?" Babalado asked, voice trembling. "This is where your defiance led you." Inzwi turned her head away. She couldn't meet their gaze. She had no words for the storm inside her. Rumors, like wild bushfire, spread fast in Azonti. Everywhere she went, silence would greet her arrival. Market women would pause their chatter and look away, but the deepest cut came from Ayira and Sedi, the ones she once called sisters. One dusty afternoon, Inzwi dialed Ayira. "Can we meet tomorrow? I need to talk." "I'm busy," came Ayira's dry response. "Maybe the day after." There was a pause. Then Ayira spoke coldly. "Look, Inzwi, maybe it's best we stop being seen together. You've got too much baggage now." The line went dead. Sedi didn't even offer that much. She simply never answered again. Back at home, the air was thick. Words flew like spears between Inzwi and her parents. One evening, after yet another shouting match, Babalado slammed his staff against the ground. "If you think you are grown enough to make your choices, then go. Go and live with that boy. He is your burden now." Olamide wept, but didn't argue. Her voice was too tired. "We tried to warn you," she whispered, "but you chose this path." The next morning, Inzwi stood once more outside Kwame's shack, her bags weighing more than just cloth. They carried shame, fear, and uncertainty. Kwame opened the door. His face fell. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone uneasy. "My parents sent me back to you," she said softly. "They said I should stay here." Kwame hesitated. Then, with a nod, he stepped aside and let her in. But if Inzwi thought life with him would be like before, she was wrong. The room hadn't grown. It still felt like a box. The air was stale, and the little money Kwame had scraped from card games and dice had dried up. Inzwi, used to her mother's warm meals and clean clothes, now found herself scrubbing pots, fetching water, and trying to stretch one yam into two. Meals Kwame spent his days with idle friends, laughing in the street while she sat alone, rubbing her growing belly. One evening she gathered the courage. "Kwame, we need food, there's nothing left." Kwame shrugged, stretching lazily. "I've got no money, can't you manage?" "Go call your family," Kwame muttered, not looking up from his battered chair. "My family?" Inzwi's voice rose in disbelief. "They're the ones who sent me here. You said I could stay, you said I was your responsibility now." Kwame exhaled loudly and walked out, the wooden door creaking shut behind him. Inzwi stood there, her eyes welling with tears. As the moons passed, reality unveiled its harshness. What once felt like freedom now resembled a chain. The sweetness she had tasted with Kwame had grown bitter on her tongue. Living with him turned into a storm with no shelter. Kwame, who once smiled and called her beautiful, now barely spoke. He'd vanish with the sunrise and return deep into the night, reeking of burukutu and anger. Heavily pregnant and entirely alone, Inzwi bore the weight of it all. "Kwame," she said one evening, hands wrapped around her swollen belly. "There's nothing left to eat. We don't even have firewood." "That's your business," he barked, sinking onto the couch and lighting a cigarette. "Figure it out." Tears slid down her cheeks as she stared at him, a man who once held her close but now seemed made of stone. She hadn't eaten since the day before, and the last coins in her wrapper had long vanished. Hunger gnawed at her bones. She rummaged through the cracked wooden cabinet, finding only a half-empty tin of Gary. She poured some into a calabash, added water and swallowed spoonfuls with shaking hands. "This can't be my life," she whispered through sobs. "This isn't what I wanted." Kwame's bitterness deepened as her delivery approached. He'd explode over small things, shouting curses and blame. "You brought this shame here," he spat one night. "I never begged you to come." And then, in a burst of cruelty, he hit her, ignoring her swollen stomach and trembling body. A week later, under the flickering oil lamp of a poorly equipped rural clinic, Inzwi gave birth to a baby boy. No family, no Kwame. Only a soft-spoken midwife held her hand. When she returned to the apartment, cradling her newborn in a wrapper, she hoped things might change. But they didn't. Kwame didn't lift a finger. He refused to buy baby cloth or even soap. Inzwi began knocking on neighbors' doors, begging for food, porridge, or cloth scraps. The baby's cries echoed in the single-room house, a haunting lullaby of pain. One night, rocking him in her arms as he wailed with hunger, Inzwi broke down. "I chose wrong," she whispered. "I should have listened to Mama and Papa." The next morning, with a small bundle of cloth and her baby wrapped close, she began the long walk back to Azonti. Every step thudded like a heartbeat of shame. When she reached her parents' compound, She stood outside the gate for what felt like forever. Her legs trembled. Finally she knocked. The door creaked open, and Madame Olamide stood frozen in place. "Inzwi," she whispered, eyes flooding with tears. "Mama," Inzwi sobbed, falling to her knees. "I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please forgive me." Babalado appeared behind his wife. His face was firm, but when his eyes landed on the baby, they softened. Both mother and father saw the wear in her face, the weight in her steps. She was no longer the same girl. "Get up," Babalado said gently. "Come inside." As she stepped into the compound, a wave of warmth and grief crashed over her. She knew rebuilding trust would take time, but she also knew this was where her healing would begin. Life at home wasn't easy. Her parents forgave her, but they didn't pretend all was well. "You are our child," her mother would often say, "but this scar, you will carry it always." They fed her. They held her baby. They let her rest. And though the weight in the air lingered, so did love. Inzwi dedicated herself to her baby. She kept him close, sang to him, and whispered stories of hope into his ears. But the past haunted her. One day, news reached her. Classmates were graduating from Sango Secondary. On social media, Ayira and Sadie posted photos in green gowns, smiling with their certificates. Inzwi sat on her mat, phone trembling in her hands, her baby asleep in her lap. "This could have been me," she murmured, tears splashing on the screen. She had been deceived. She had ignored wisdom. Her parents gently encouraged her to return to school. "Education isn't for others," her father said one evening. "It is for you." But fear gripped her heart. "What will the villagers say?" she asked her mother. "They will talk," Olamide said softly. "But it's better to walk forward while they whisper than to stay frozen while they watch." Weeks turned into months. She didn't go back yet, but the seed had been planted. Each night, rocking her son beneath the lantern's glow, she thought about the paths she had left behind, the warnings she had brushed aside, the love she thought she understood, and the future she still had a chance to shape. If only I had listened, she'd think, heart aching with memory, but she didn't allow herself to drown in regret. Slowly, step by step, she vowed to rise. She learned to see her parents' rules not as prisons, but as protection. She began to understand the value of what she once rejected. In time, her story became one that others whispered, not in shame, but in warning, a tale mothers told daughters, a truth elders shared in the village square. "Let the story of Inzwi remind you," they'd say, "that choices have weight, and some wounds take years to heal." Her journey was far from over. But one thing was clear. The fire she walked through had not destroyed her, it had shaped her.